After coming out to myself at 15, I tried to make sure that nobody else knew out of the shame that came from the church and my family. I would often sneak onto the computer to watch more videos, and in a bold or stupid move, depending on how you look at it, I also started watching LGBT themed movies on Netflix where everyone could see what I was watching. Now that I think about it, I probably wasn't as subtle or secretive as I thought when titles like Bear City and Angora Ranch, Eating Out, and The Homewrecker appeared in that recently watched section, all with highly homoerotic or homo-romantic posters. I guess that I just simply just didn't care after all. My mother, my younger sister, and closeted older brother were unhappy about it, but I still denied that I was gay every time until one day I had enough of the lies to everyone else as well. The next time my brother confronted me asking me if I was gay, I didn't deny it. I said over and over again that I was, but he refused to accept it, that I couldn't be gay because it went against everything that we were taught. But I was done lying, and if I continued living a lie, it would have killed me. After that moment, our brotherly friendship was never the same. I think it was about in November 2011 when I came out to my guidance counselor, then my health teacher, then a couple of my friends in my biology class. I started coming out of my shell more and more as I began to come out and tell more people that I was gay or simply refusing to hide it from others. But I was stupid to think that nobody would say anything to their parents and not inform my parents about me. And that's one of the many things that I dislike about Mormon culture or just Christian culture in general, the gossip mills, how everyone needs to know about everything about everyone. Point out the most inconsequential things and pick at it until it festers and boils up into some hideous, ridiculous issue that isolates you from groups. I wasn't ready to come out to anyone in my family, but someone took that choice away from me and went straight to my mother. She didn't take the news well, and one evening she sat me down at the dinner table and she said some unfriendly things to me. Things that I can't remember all that was said, mostly because I blocked the majority of it out. But I do remember her asking me what it meant to be gay, and I replied with the most basic definition possible, that I was a boy who was attracted to other boys and other people of my own gender. And she just straight up said, "No, that's not right." And as many people know, people fear what they don't understand, and what they fear, they tend to hate. And the church pushes these feelings hard into their members when they're young, that if anything deviates even slightly from the plan of salvation, that it's an unknown, that should be pushed away and ignored or left unspoken. And if it pushes back, then you push harder with spikes. Spikes that jab into your heart and leave you wanting to die. After that night, my mother continued to occasionally sermonize at me, and every single time when I had to stand my own ground and fight, it felt like a piece of my own heart was getting pulled out of my chest every single time. And one day was especially hard when I attempted to get on her level to explain to her that perhaps her God had meant for me not to reproduce, just like how my aunt and uncle couldn't because of their biology. Making me gay would practically guarantee that, so that I can make a family the same as theirs with three wonderful daughters. Well, they have three wonderful daughters. I mean, I haven't seen them in a while, but I love them all the same. And after that, she threatened to slap my face. Excuse me. I've received spankings before by hand and by belt, as it was a normalized form of discipline for decades, but I've never been threatened with violence like that, especially by one of my parents. I would have believed that neither of them would ever harm me. But once my mother said that, I started thinking otherwise and began to become afraid of my own mother. And I can't remember if it was before or after, but after church one Sunday, she dropped everyone off and then drove me to temple grounds that I had never seen before. There was a large green field with the temple about a city block away from the black fence and a shroud of trees where the parking lot was. And after she parked the small Honda that we had at the time, she started to sermonize at me again. And I honestly thought that she was just going to abandon me right there and drive off. I knew that's what happened to many LGBT kids whose parents learn about their sexual or gender identity and can't learn to accept, to cope, or at the very least tolerate their child in a new light. A grand majority of homeless youth are LGBT kids who are tossed to the streets by their families, and gay kids are more likely to kill themselves than their straight classmates. And transgender kids are also far more higher than that, all because they didn't receive all the love, care, and hope that they can be themselves and not get thrown out of their homes. And in most cases, these homeless youth are forced into prostitution just to find a place indoors to sleep and hopefully get something to eat if their next suitors don't compel them into a drug addiction and alcoholism that would kill them ever more quickly. And I was afraid that would have been my fate as well. But I struggled on, living out and proud despite my family's disappointment in me. However, it should go without saying that fighting leaves one tired and wounded and covered with scars and a looming darkness that began to fall over my eyes. I already wasn't doing well in school, and I just refused to care for any of it when all I wanted to do was to die. My dad tried to get me motivated into getting my grades up, and often at times it just made me feel worse when all the effort I put into the work seemed for nothing. And when I got punished for it, it just made me feel worse about myself. I wanted to talk to my dad about it, but I didn't think I could because of how angry he was with me and some of my siblings. The older three of us especially, he would come down on us when we didn't do what we were supposed to be doing, same as with our mom. And sometimes he would mock us about it. And when we stood up for ourselves, we'd be met with physical acts. He would only spank us sometimes, but I do remember that he grabbed and he shoved and he yelled. The yelling was always the worst because it always scared me more than the physical stuff. And for a time, I felt like I had already lost my mother's love. My dad was too angry with me to care. My siblings didn't want anything to do with me, and I was already messing up so much of my life that I just couldn't take it anymore. And so during my free lunch period in my junior year, I walked home alone and prepared a hot lunch for myself. But this time the dark thoughts entered my mind. I can't remember what it was that day that made them come. But as soon as I finished with my cheese omelet and took care of the dishes, I turned to the medicine cabinet near the fridge and opened it up. And there in front of me, as if it like a sign of salvation, was my way out. I reached in, grabbed the bottle of Motrin, unscrewed the cap, and poured every single pill into my hand. As I stared down the pile of orange pills, my thoughts raced as I thought about swallowing them all and allowing myself to fall away from all the pain that was my life. I didn't know if it would be quick and painless or if I'd end up like Joffrey Baratheon. Skin purple, bile and foam spewing from my mouth, eyes blood red, and claw marks on my throat from my fingers as I would have struggled to breathe. But what did I care about how it happened? So long as all the pain would eventually fade, so long as that I would finally be at peace, that would be all that mattered. But then I thought how it would affect my family. First seeing me dead or dying, and how if I died, then what would become of them? Despite all that was said and done by my family at the time, they were only doing what they did out of love for me. And even though my two older brothers had grown up and gone away, I still had three younger siblings that I would never see become the amazing people that they are now. And if they lost their brother so soon in their lives, how would they have coped? Would they have blamed my parents? Would they have blamed themselves? Would my parents blame themselves or each other, and then would they try to follow me to the grave? And if so, by their own hands or each other's? I realized at that moment that despite all the pain and the sorrow that I was going through, that my death would have left a crater in the hearts of my family and the friends that I made at the time. And that would have been a hole that would never heal. And if an afterlife does exist and I wound up there, I would have spent it wallowing in guilt and shame for what I had done to the people connected to me. And so with that guilt and shame now guiding my hands, I put the pills back into the bottle and stepped out of the house as quickly as I could. I didn't tell anyone about it, about what I had almost done until years later. And I don't blame my parents for what I almost did. I don't blame myself for it either. I don't blame anyone. I blame the institution where they came from, who told them all their lives to dish out tough love when your children misbehave or don't act in a way that follows with its rules. I guess I also could be more motivated to be. I guess I could have also been more motivated to be a more devoted student, but I was honestly past the point of caring about my future because the future still seems bleak at this point. But that is why I choose not to think about the future and just live in the now. Because this is what's happening right here, right now. This is where we live. And I'm not going to live my life fussing and worrying about the future and other things that I can't control. And suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary issue. I knew what I had to do. I just had to gather my courage and do what I had to do in order to face the darkness. And I did. And it got me in its jaws, chewed me up, and swallowed me whole. But it choked on me. I eventually came out to my dad after we had a pretty emotional talk about my grades. I was stressed out and I needed to vent to someone in the family about my feelings, and I told him. I cried for a few long minutes before he calmed me down, and I suggested finding a place where I could probably be cured because I thought that's what he would have wanted. But to my surprise, he told me that there was nothing wrong with me. He told me how he had a gay roommate in college and he had learned much from him and what he had went through as a queer individual. And in those days, being gay was still pretty unheard of and still heavily stigmatized. And after I came out to him, I felt like he could see those same struggles within me. And from then on, there was a better understanding between my father and I. I mean, he still forced me to go to church and was still hard on me to get my grades up, but he was fair with me in regards to my sexual orientation. Excuse me. The summer after my junior year, my family moved back to Arizona. The reasons were many: because of the snow, because we needed less space, because of the social pressure being in the motherland. But for whatever reason, which turned out to be the last one, we were all back where all my memories began. And to be honest, I dreaded going back to where it all started. And on top of that, I was entering my senior year of high school all by myself. My older brother was on a mission. My oldest brother was out and about trying to get his life together. My relationship with my parents was still not as great as it should have been. And I think when we got down there, shit hit the fan. Before we could officially move into the house, we had to stay at a hotel until we were ready. And for about a week, we were all cramped up together with little to no space of our own. And on top of that, I really needed to blow off steam. I was pent up for days after the long drive, and being within reaching distance of my parents and younger siblings at all times left me with very little opportunity to blow off steam. And so the moment I found myself alone in the hotel room while my parents went out with my siblings to find school supplies, I pulled out a pirated copy of a pornographic furry comic that I had printed out in the school computer lab in secret and in stages. Excuse me. But it didn't stay secret for long, as my dad caught me with it multiple times and threw it away, only for me to dish it out of the garbage can and hide it away yet again. Looking back, I believe that I was sort of devious. I think sneaking around on YouTube and the rest of the internet had a part to play in it, as well as mine and my brother's attempts to get out of church activities as much as possible. We became good at it. I became good at it. And what made it worse was how much I liked it. Although I did believe sneaking some coffee-flavored Three Musketeers candy bars into my hardcore Mormon household was pretty badass, this was different, and also very probably illegal. But just as I pulled it out and got to all the nasty bits that I love so much, my dad walked back into the room to get his car keys that he forgot on the way out and caught me with it yet again, and that was the very last time that I saw this copy that I had printed. And not wanting to tempt fate, and after getting immediately turned off, I went to the lobby to get myself some actual coffee to calm my nerves. And then my mom was down there, and and watched as I poured and just about walked off if she hadn't pulled me aside to talk about what I assumed would be about the porn I had. But instead, it was just another sermon about how wrong it was to be gay. And I wasn't in the mood for it. I really wasn't anymore. But I stood my ground and defended myself without hesitation or revulsion. That is until my mom accused me in the middle of the lobby that I wanted to have sex with my brothers. I told her how disgusting that was, and then she turned it back on me and told me that I was disgusting. And after that, I didn't know if I wanted a relationship with my mother or not. Even after everything else she said to me, that was the moment that I knew she would always choose the church over me, her child. And it took me so long to be content with that idea. And I decided the moment I turned 18 that I would be done with the church, because as a legal adult, nobody can make me worship as I didn't want to per the religious freedom laws, my free agency, and the First Amendment. In church, that I was always taught that I had a choice, that because of my free agency, I could decide whether to be on Heavenly Father's side or Satan's side depending upon the choices that I made. But I have come to realize that I never had a choice in the long run. It was never my choice to be baptized. It was never my church. It was never my choice to sit in a room with people who told me that what my life would be like and how wonderful death would be. It was never my choice to be a disappointment to my family, but I soon discovered a third option: my side, my way. The way that prevents me from willfully hurting others and myself, treating people with respect, and would allow me to be happy with my life. And if others viewed it as a sin, I was wholly prepared to accept their judgment. What I view as a personal sin is lying about my feelings for men, not standing up for myself and others, enforcing prejudice for other marginalized groups of people, and denying myself the indulgence that life offers me. To have unconditional love, to be comfortable in my own skin, to have a life with a husband and children, and be proud of all I accomplished to get to that point. And even if that life doesn't happen, like Electra Abundance, I will take anything that I want when I can and devote my life to never tone down, to never tone myself down for anyone. To have more, to be more than what others think they can pressure me to be. Because if I've learned anything, the way that others view the word sin is that it makes me powerful, it makes me beautiful, it makes me love life. It makes me feel alive, and I like it. No, I love it. I wouldn't be alive without it. Sin is living. Sin is dying without regret. Sin is leaving your mark on the world to make it different than it was yesterday. Better. Not just for me, but for everyone else. Just as a couple sexy demons said in a song, I will forever have a fucking reason to sin. But getting back to my senior year of high school, I actually physically, emotionally, and mentally pulled myself away from the church, and I even started a relationship with a man I met online. I had already stopped paying my tithing by the time I was 13, unless of course I was forced to by my parents. But that year, I refused to do fast offerings, prepare the sacrament, or do young men's activities, which didn't earn me any favors with my parents. My mother actually vocalized her disappointment with me for not doing fast offerings when the bishop directly asked me to. But at that moment, I already decided that her disappointment would no longer affect how I lived my life as an authentic individual. I still had a few bleach spots in my brainwashing, though, that I needed to throw some dirt on, though. I was still embarrassed about my masturbation habits, and I agreed to go to a therapy group for other addictions. Some of them, I admit, were valid: alcoholism, drug addiction, etc. But the talks about sex and masturbation addiction slowly becoming more and more just ridiculous. And one early morning after a particularly long session, I was almost a whole half hour late for school and actually had to miss out on my first period to go to detention and write lines like some delinquent. And after that day, I never went back to another session and never shamed myself about my personal habits ever again. Because the embarrassment, so not worth it. I did still have to go to church, however. My father and I would sometimes fight on Sundays for me to attend church meetings and stay for Sunday school. One day, I wanted to sit in the foyer because I didn't want to be around other people. I had a horrible nightmare the other night that left me half awake for the final part of the night and most of the morning. I was feeling especially vulnerable and unhappy and disgusted with myself, but my dad picked me up from the chair and shoved me into the sacrament room to join our family. Thankfully, I had a tablet by this time that I could distract and distance myself with, especially in sacrament meetings or when I sat in the foyer during Sunday school. But over time, even that became tedious. Sorry. But over time, even that began to become tedious. The cycle kept on going for over 2 years, even after I handed in my resignation letter. My thoughts at the time were, I'll go if I have to, but I don't have to be a part of it. Until eventually my parents told me that they weren't going to force me to go anymore. There wasn't any blackmail or threats of punishments, and I think that they were just done trying to get me to come. They asked me if I would come on Sundays, but the answer was always a revolving no. And it's still a revolving no. And eventually, that stopped too, and I was finally and completely free. And, excuse me, that said a lot to me, that if you stick to your guns and you fight for what you want or need, then eventually you will get it. It took nearly 10 years, but it was an effort that was worth it, and the reward was great. The relief I felt to never fight a constant battle was absolutely intoxicating. Some days I would be so happy to be free that I actually cried because I wasn't in pain anymore. And because you see, every Sunday for 5 years, my right shoulder would tense up and cause me a lot of pain in my back. And I believe that it was purely psychosomatic because when I went home for the rest of the evening, my shoulders and my back would be completely pain free. And I would never feel that pain again until the very next Sunday. And when the final confirmation letter came by, I hung it up as a reminder of how sweet the fruits of your efforts can be. Here, I'll show you. I'll show it to you really quick. See? This is what made it all worth it for me. But we can get to more of that right now. We're gonna get to more of that right now. Excuse me. This lighting is awful. I was about 20 years old when the November 2015 doctrine came out about how children of LGBT parents could only be baptized into the church if they renounced their parents' lifestyles and basically their entire family. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. Weeks earlier, I wrote a large letter to the LDS records to have my name removed from them, but I hesitated. I finished writing my letter and I was so afraid to print it because I knew that once it was sent, that was it, and I couldn't take it back. The church was a part of my life for so long. Being a Mormon was a part of my identity that was given to me through years of preparation, baptisms, parties, celebrations. And I admit that I had some good times in the church. Even with all the heartache and suffering, so much was done for the sake of me. Things that made me happy or made me think that I was happy, and things that made me feel important. And all that would have been gone forever. It felt like I would have been throwing something important away. I was afraid that my parents would know, that my family would know, and that people in the ward would know and speculate like LDS folk do until it became fact in their eyes. I didn't want my parents to be belittled, and I didn't want my siblings to be bullied because of me. And the thought of speaking to the bishop about my confirmation dropped a block of ice in my stomach. Of course, I didn't have to speak to him, but I was afraid that the church would still have some sort of power over me if I didn't. And what made it worse was the realization that it still had power over me. I needed it. I hated it. It was like living in a toxic relationship with someone you know treats you like garbage, but you stay because they made you afraid and insecure to be without them. And that was what was going on then. I was still afraid to be without the church. It was my safety net. If I didn't have it, and by possible extension, my family, what else would I have? And so I just decided to keep onto the letter and postpone sending and printing and sending it. I was still forced to go to church during this time, but again, I didn't have to be part of it. During each sacrament meeting, I wrote fan fiction on my tablet and just zoned myself out. And then right after, I'd either continue writing or watch videos under headphones or rest my eyes in the foyer. But when the November Doctrine came out, that was the edge that gave me the impulse that I needed to pull it off without remorse and without fear. And so I printed out my letter, stamped it, and sent it. The moment I dropped it into the mailbox, I knew that I was in the final stages of walking away, finally, from a toxic environment. And of course, my mom talked to me about this and began sermonizing again. But this time was different. Before, it felt like I was on the defense for my life. But I knew that I was about to be done with it all, and so it didn't really matter to me. I sent my letter just before the mail truck picked up the outgoing mail, and it was done. All those fears that I had were just gone. My head was held high, and I stood my ground with newfound power and courage. Weeks later, I got a letter back from the church basically telling me to reconsider my choices, as if I didn't understand all the blessings and things that I was walking away from, and that any request to leave has to go through the bishop of my present ward, as if the 10-page letter that I wrote detailing the sorry, as if the 10-page letter that I wrote detailing my personal issues with Jesus, slaughtering roughly a tenth of a country, 3 times the size of New Mexico, and my status at the time as an atheist meant absolutely nothing to them or the words that carried their meaning. I was tempted to write them again, to reemphasize my wishes, when the bishop called and asked to see me the following Sunday for a talk. Again, I didn't have to go, but I did anyway. And after Sunday school in the Relief Society room, my bishop pulled me aside and we walked to his office. I don't really recall much of what happened or what we talked about, but I do remember that he was desperate for me to reconsider. He said that he loved me and he cared for me, and I don't doubt that he cared, even now. But in all honesty, he didn't really know me. It's true that I made no effort to socialize with anyone in the ward, but because of the experiences that I had in Utah, I was not in the mood to be part of another social hierarchy where I felt like I was at the bottom of the totem pole for being who I am. But still, I felt bad for him. I told him that my letter was sent and that I had no intention of returning. But then I told my very last lie to a bishop and said that maybe when the church changes its stance on LGBT relationships and marriages, that I would consider it. And to be honest, I don't think they ever will. I think that they're on their last legs now, and I think if Dallin H. Oaks becomes the prophet, then he will be the rotten plank that will cause the entire cabinet to break, because others say that their shelves broke and they're not, and so yeah, uh yeah, but anyway, let's see, where was I? Oh yes, but as I said before, that was me trying to spare his feelings, or at least that's what I'd like to say if I didn't give him a comparative statement to hearing that still small voice in your head to schizophrenia. I think he took that as an insult and said that I was a pretty smart young man. Again, I think I insulted him, and I think he was retaliating just to get a response out of me. And if he were to listen to my story, I would apologize for what I said at the moment, and I do apologize for what I said at the moment. I don't know why I said what I said. Maybe it was because I was feeling cornered and on the defensive, like when my mother tried to sermonize and gaslight me into believing that what I wanted, what I needed, was wrong. And that's just another part of my Asperger's that made me feel like an ass sometimes. Sometimes I can't tell if I'm being rude or plain spoken, but I have since discovered that due to my experiences, I may have religious trauma syndrome. Very probably complex PTSD if I can believe what I've researched online. And every time I have an in depth discussion with someone about the church or other important topics where I meet resistance, I sometimes get dizzy and nauseous. And I'm still skeptical about therapy after all the bishop interviews where I had to lie my butt off, or when I got shot down simply for speaking my mind.